Rainwater and snowmelt are fundamental to life on this planet. And when pure, clean stormwater runoff flows naturally into surface waters like streams, rivers, lakes, and estuaries, all life benefits, human, animal, even plant life. But when runoff from business or government facilities encounters industrial materials and waste in its pathway, all life suffers. Because stormwater runoff receives absolutely no treatment before being discharged into surface waters, polluted runoff immediately becomes polluted surface water. Drinking water supplies are threatened, wildlife habitats are destroyed. The list of materials that can pollute stormwater runoff is almost endless. Oils, fuels, chemicals, paint, salt, coal, solvents, detergents, dust, metal scrap, waste paper, plastic, and packaging materials. Even though operations that use these materials have become ever more environmentally friendly, the problem still persists. The National Academy of Sciences estimates that contaminated stormwater runoff is the primary cause of pollution in about 18% of lakes and about 32% of estuaries. Here in the 21st century, we've pretty well cleaned up the large point sources of water pollution like industrial wastewater discharges. So it may seem that the small amount of materials and waste that stormwater picks up from your single facility is a relatively small problem. Just a drop in the bucket, really. But the trouble is, the water in that bucket that we're polluting is all the streams, rivers, and lakes we'll ever have. Those drops of stormwater runoff feed into all the fresh water on Earth. That's why it's so important for all employees to prevent stormwater pollution in the workplace, to make sure that every drop that goes into that bucket is clean and healthy. Your facility, along with thousands of others around the country, has been specifically identified as a potential source of stormwater pollution. In fact, your facility may have been issued a discharge permit for its stormwater runoff. This permit requires that you and your coworkers take effective measures to protect the streams, lakes, and rivers in your area. To accomplish this, your facility has prepared a stormwater pollution prevention plan. The plan identifies a pollution prevention team or coordinator that is responsible for overseeing stormwater. These team members are the ones you can go to if you see a stormwater pollution problem or if you have questions or suggestions. This plan describes inspections that will be carried out at regular intervals. It will identify specific outdoor areas, operations, and materials that pose a threat to stormwater runoff, and how runoff will be protected in each of these areas. The plan will detail all the records that must be kept to document success: inspection reports, reports to the state or federal regulatory authority, and spill cleanup records. The plan identifies all the control measures, often called best management practices or BMPs, that will be employed at your facility. Exercising these pollution controls is where you come into the picture. It takes a conscientious, committed workforce to protect the quality of water that fills that bucket. Remember, that is all the fresh water we have on Earth. Stormwater's biggest threat is from industrial materials and waste that are uncontrolled, like a spill left unchecked. Materials left laying out on the ground or pavement, or in an open drum, bucket, or bag. Good housekeeping is a control measure that works to keep all industrial materials and waste under control and never exposed to stormwater. When any operations are performed outdoors like vehicle maintenance, manufacturing, painting, or cleaning, make sure to protect stormwater. Sweep up scraps, dust, grindings, and shavings regularly, at least after every shift and when rain is expected. Good housekeeping is especially important for dust or particulates that can accumulate near outdoor work areas and around air pollution control equipment, like dust collectors and bag houses. Sweep these areas regularly. When performing work over bare dirt or any non-cleanable surface, take steps to catch the waste before they hit the ground. For painting, scraping, grinding, blasting, or cleaning that might leave residues, place a tarp or drop cloth directly under your work. When finished, fold up the drop cloth and shake it out into a dumpster or the suitable waste container. When disposing of waste in a dumpster or waste receptacle outdoors, make sure all the waste goes inside the container. Only use lidded, lined, or watertight receptacles, and make sure to close the lid when you're done. If the nearest container is full or overflowing, find another one. Waste lying on the ground or on top of a pile left open to the weather might just as well be thrown right into the nearest stream. At the end of the day or of your shift, put all supplies and materials away, preferably indoors. Good housekeeping keeps your materials away from the runoff and out of the bucket. Accidental spills, leaks, and discharges are always a threat to stormwater. Keep materials in clearly labeled containers. Keep lids, caps, and tops securely in place unless you are actually using the contents. This is especially important when containers are being moved or transported. Double-check that caps, lids, and bungs are tight before you carry, load, or unload any containers. One of the most effective devices for protecting stormwater is secondary containment. If a bulk tank or container should leak or rupture, the secondary containment structure under and around these containers will capture the spill before it can contact stormwater. Even small containers can use secondary containment. If one of these cans were kicked over, the spill will still be controlled. If you see any free product or other materials inside of secondary containment, clean it up quickly. Do not drain the material or hose it out. That defeats the whole purpose of secondary containment. Also, when transferring liquids, do it inside of secondary containment. For example, this tank truck is being offloaded over an impervious paved area with berms surrounding it, so any drips or spills are captured. For added protection, transfer lines used for liquid loading or offloading should be drained before they are disconnected. When hoses or lines cannot be drained, drip buckets can be used to capture incidental drips that occur while making or breaking connections. When they are not in use, transfer lines and hoses should be capped to prevent even small drips from escaping. And never use a storm drain or ditch as a place to dispose of waste or unwanted materials. This is called an illicit discharge and is a serious violation of your facility's stormwater permit. It's like tossing your garbage right into the bucket on purpose. Another effective control measure is called exposure minimization. This means preventing stormwater or snowmelt from ever coming into contact with industrial materials or wastes. The best way to minimize exposure is simply to use and store supplies and materials indoors. If you don't have to bring it outdoors, don't. If you must store or use materials outdoors, how about under a roof overhang or awning? That provides some protection. But don't put them near a downspout or a storm drain inlet or any place where runoff is channeled. When materials must be stored outdoors temporarily and there is no shelter, a tarp or waterproof covering should be used. Regardless of where they are used, temporary covers must be secure and must be periodically checked for loosening or tearing due to wind or for material handling. Minimizing exposure is very important for shipping and receiving operations. When materials are being shipped or received, do it from a covered loading rack or dock if possible. Avoid loading or offloading where a spill or accident will be exposed to the weather. Loading docks with skirts or roof overhangs are best. If you must load or unload outdoors, do it as far away from storm drain inlets as possible. If there is a storm drain inlet nearby, place a cover or mat over it or place absorbents around it before you start. This way, if a spill or accident does occur, you bought yourself more time to deal with it. If vehicles or equipment are washed outdoors, contain the wash water inside a berm or curb and channel the wastewater into the sanitary sewer, if allowed, for disposal, not to the storm drain. Materials that are never exposed to stormwater will never make it into the bucket. Structural stormwater controls, like secondary containments, require maintenance just like any other operating equipment. If you spot a crack or gap in a containment structure, either fix it quickly or notify your supervisor or EHS specialist so it can be repaired before the next storm. Preventive maintenance should also be performed on any outdoor equipment that could expose potential pollutants to stormwater, like transfer lines, pipelines, hydraulic equipment, pumps, and hoses. Locations where leaks can occur must be regularly inspected for wear, damage, or corrosion. Items like quick disconnects, gaskets, or rubber hoses that are known to wear out should be repaired or replaced before they wear out. Similarly, if you spot a container that is dented or rusty, make arrangements to have the contents transferred into another container or place it in an overpacked drum. That way, even if the old drum springs a leak, it still won't make it into the bucket. Spills of industrial materials pose a major threat to runoff unless they are cleaned up promptly and thoroughly. Spills of non-hazardous materials should be cleaned up by whoever caused the spill. Be prepared to respond quickly to spills by knowing where the response supplies and equipment are kept. Know the location of the nearest spill locker or supply bin for each of your work areas. Know what cleanup equipment is available in these lockers. Non-sparking shovels, dustpans, and brooms should be stocked, along with absorbents, waste containers, and caution cones. If the spill is a non-hazardous dry material, cleanup is usually straightforward. First, make sure you have the appropriate personal protective equipment. Protective eyewear and gloves are usually the minimum needed. Then sweep, shovel, or scoop up the waste. These are called dry cleanup methods. Never wash down, hose down, or sweep the spill into a storm drain or into the street. That just pushes the waste into the nearest river or stream. Be sure to get all the waste up. It may take more than one sweeping. Place everything in a sturdy, leak-tight container. Then dispose of the waste appropriately. For spills or leaks of non-hazardous liquids, you'll have to absorb the material first before you can clean it up. Again, use dry cleanup methods. Never wash a spill down by hosing it into a storm drain, ditch, or into the street. As before, place the used absorbents in an appropriate leak-tight container and dispose of the waste according to applicable local and state regulations. Never put any free liquids into plant trash. Add more absorbent or repackage if needed. Spills of hazardous materials like gasoline, solvents, acids, and plating solution pose a bigger cleanup problem. Unless you've been properly trained and equipped on hazardous material spill response, contact your safety or environmental specialist for instructions before cleaning up any hazardous spill or leak. Now you know what is expected of you to protect stormwater runoff and the lakes, rivers, and streams in your area. Practice good housekeeping. Clean up all outdoor work areas regularly. Sweep up scraps, dust, and shavings at least after every shift. When working over bare ground or surface you can't easily sweep or clean, use a drop cloth or tarp to catch wastes and drips and dispose of the waste appropriately. Outdoors, use only dumpsters with lids or leak-tight or lined waste receptacles. Put materials and supplies away, indoors or under cover when you're done with them. When working with liquids, place a drip bucket or tarp under the work. Prevent spills by always keeping containers securely closed unless you're actually using them. Never transport an open or leaking container. Store containers of liquid inside of secondary containment so that leaks and spills are captured. Be on the lookout for leaking equipment or potential leaks, and for secondary containments that have been compromised by cracks, gaps, or damage, and get them repaired quickly. Try to avoid storing materials outdoors, exposed to the weather. Move materials indoors into a shed or under a roof overhang. If this is not possible, cover them with a waterproof tarp or other covering, and check the cover regularly for loosening or damage. Know and practice the proper methods for cleaning up small spills or leaks. Clean up spills quickly and thoroughly using dry cleanup methods. Never hose down a spill. Your commitment to protect stormwater is important. If you understand and exercise these basic controls and procedures, we can protect stormwater runoff, protect drinking water, protect recreation areas, protect wildlife habitat. We can make sure that every drop of stormwater runoff that goes into the bucket is clean and pure.
In this video, we will cover hazard communications, or HAZCOM. Millions of workers work with and are potentially exposed to one or more chemical hazards. There are approximately 650,000 existing chemical products and hundreds of new ones being introduced each year. A hazardous chemical is any chemical which is a physical or health hazard. Chemical hazard communication is one of the most frequently cited OSHA standards. Safety data sheets are prepared by chemical manufacturers or importers and are provided to the user free of cost. The safety data sheet must describe the physical hazards such as fire, explosions, and reactivity. It must describe health hazards such as signs of exposure. In addition, it must provide emergency and first aid procedures. Employers must have a written hazard communication program that describes how they will inform employees of the hazards of non-routine tasks, such as cleaning a box compactor. It must also inform the employees of the hazards associated with chemicals. This includes signs and routes of exposure, as well as precautions for safe handling and use. In addition, the safety data sheet must describe the precautions for safe handling and use, as well as first aid procedures. The safety data sheet must be in English and include the specific chemical identity and common names. The employer is responsible for identifying and listing hazardous chemicals in their workplace. The employer must implement a written HAZCOM program. They must communicate hazard information, health effects, exposure limits, and presence of known cancer-causing substances to employees through safety data sheets, labels, and formal training programs. The employer must certify that the employee understood the training. The safety data sheets must be readily accessible to employees at the work area. Training is required for employees who are exposed to hazardous chemicals in their work area at the time of initial assignment and whenever a new hazard is introduced into their work area. The employee is responsible for completing the required training, reading and understanding the safety data sheet, and following the requirements that apply to the hazardous chemicals. OSHA's Hazard Communication Standard is based on the concept that employees have both a need and a right to know the hazards and identities of the chemicals they are exposed to when working. Employees also need to know what protective measures are available to prevent adverse effects from occurring. Things to remember. 1. Employees have a right to know the hazards and identities of the chemicals they are exposed to in the workplace. Employees also need to know what protective measures are available to prevent adverse effects from occurring. 2. The written HAZCOM program is required because it ensures that all employers receive the information they need to inform and train their employees and provides necessary hazard information to employees. 3. Employers and employees have a responsibility to comply with the OSHA Hazard Communication Regulation. For information about OSHA hazard communication, you can visit osha.gov.
What is GHS? GHS is the globally harmonized system of classification and labeling of chemicals. On December 1, 2013, the United States Occupational Safety and Health Administration will start phasing in GHS. GHS will standardize the labels and data sheets used to communicate chemical hazards, making them easier to identify and helping reduce the likelihood of workplace injuries and fatalities. There are over 5 million workplaces in the U.S. where employees could be exposed to hazardous chemicals. So what's changing? With GHS, material safety data sheets, or what used to be known as MSDS, will now be safety data sheets, or SDS. The safety data sheets will feature a standard format with 16 sections. Another big GHS change? The hazard ratings will reverse order. The new GHS hazard categories: 1. Severe hazard, 2. Serious hazard, 3. Moderate hazard, 4 slight hazard, and 5 minimal hazard. And chemical manufacturers and importers will be required to provide a label that includes a harmonized signal word, a pictogram, a hazard statement for each hazard class and category, and a precautionary statement. So what will GHS save? OSHA estimates that the new standard will help prevent 43 fatalities, 585 injuries and illnesses, resulting in an estimated $475 million in enhanced productivity for U.S. businesses each year. OSHA also predicts that employers could face fines of $7,000 per infraction and $70,000 for repeat violations. Those are some big numbers. So to get